This is my truth. Tell me the truth. Tell me my truth. Tell me what the truth feels like. This is my truth.
Good afternoon, everybody. Gosh, my heart's going. I've never done anything like this before. So I'm going to treat you all as very dear friends or family because we've all got something in common. That's the angle I'm going to take. I'm going to put a stopwatch on because even though I know you're going to tell me when I'm going to run out of time, I thought when they asked me to speak that I would find it hard to speak for 20 minutes. Then I started trying to structure what I was going to say. It turns out I could talk for hours. So I'm only going to be able to give you a little brief kind of window. But as Marie said, the common theme of what I want to talk to you about is about finding peace and acceptance and my journey with that. And I know people use the word journey a lot, but it really is a journey. There's been a beginning, a very long middle, and I don't know when the end happened, but there was an end. The terrain has been mixed. Sometimes it's been smooth, sometimes I felt like I've been walking up a mountain with lead boots on. It really has been a journey. I'm actually, wish I was 35, I'm 44 now, but I was diagnosed at 35, but I'm going to skip the first 4 years because I didn't start writing my blog until 4 years after I was diagnosed, and all I can say about the first 4 years is that they were dark. They were emotionally very dark. Third, fourth year, I suddenly thought, I don't feel anything anymore. Great, I'm fine, I don't feel anything, so I'm going to write about my experience in the hope of turning it into something positive for others. I've got a couple of passages from my blogs to read you. This is what happened when I started writing my blog, assuming that I was fine. I've been spending time reading old journals, revisiting memories, and the enormity of my diagnosis has hit me all over again. It didn't come at me with one big slap around the face though, instead it just chipped away at me. My heart rate became heightened regardless of what I was doing. I felt increasingly anxious and on edge, started losing weight, and before long, realized that my body was trying to tell me something. It was telling me to stop, to acknowledge why I was feeling this way. How could this be possible though? I was diagnosed over 4 years ago now, and I honestly felt like I dealt with it as best as I could, and I'm certainly not in denial. I can clearly recall how the first year after the bombshell was dropped was a time of extreme sadness for me. If I'd been faking it though, pretending I was doing okay to others around me, when in fact the opposite was true, then had I actually been fooling myself too? It's really hard to see the fine line between pretending to be alright and genuinely coping. After all, isn't it enough to get up each day and continue on with life, regardless of how you do it? It has made me question myself. If I'd been masquerading as someone able to cope, had I actually failed myself in some way? A good friend pointed out to me that it is normal to put on a brave face, to act our way through certain challenges that life throws at us. If we didn't do that, there are times in our lives when it would be impossible to get out of bed in the morning. In other words, it's fight or flight, sink or swim. I'd done my best at the time to accept and live with the diagnosis that had pulled the rug from under my feet and turned my world upside down. The news that I was infertile came completely out of the blue, and that's the thing with extreme shock. It impacts you in such a way that you instinctively protect yourself. I built invisible walls around me so high and so deep that it's only now I've discovered that I need some help in learning how to break them down. So that was 2014. I was suffering with anxiety. My doctor signed me off work for a week. I know a week doesn't sound like very long to some people, but the business I was in at the time, a week was a long time. I would spend every night forcing myself to walk out of my flat up to my best friend's house where her and her husband would feed me, make sure I was okay. And it was there that I had a light bulb moment and a kind of epiphany. I was watching part of a series on television called Masterclass. It was part of Oprah Winfrey's series. And in this particular episode, the incredible Jane Fonda was talking. She was talking about lifting weights. She was talking about how when we want to build muscle, first we have to tear it and break it down to make it stronger. And she likened that to the human spirit, how when we feel that we're broken, we're at our lowest ebb, we're bleeding, there in that moment is the opportunity to to build ourselves and to be stronger than we were before. I never thought of it like that. I never thought that in my darkness and in that space that I was in, I never imagined that that could be an opportunity and a springboard to be a stronger person than I was previously. But first of all, I knew I had to walk through the grief. I think with emotional pain, we want to just push it aside, keep forging on. But what the first 4 years have taught me is that it's still going to be there. So I knew I had to step off this precipice into the grief, but I didn't know how. I didn't know how to do it. The weird thing to admit is that the dark place that I was in, that I wasn't necessarily conscious of, it was just like a cloud. That place that I was in had become almost comforting because it was predictable, it was constant, so therefore it kind of felt safe. And I knew who I was in that dark place. I didn't know who I was going to be if I dared to step off, move through it, and pop out the other side. Who was I going to be then? Who was I going to be without this diagnosis that had kind of been hanging over me? So the subject of grieving and of mourning is very, very difficult for other people to understand if they haven't experienced it. I wrote a blog called Grieving the Loss, and here's a little passage just to share with you from that. The word tangible, in the dictionary, it means either perceptible by touch, or it means real or actual, rather than imaginary or visionary. How do you grieve the loss of something that isn't tangible? It's a strange concept, and not one that I'd had any experience with prior to discovering I was infertile. Birth and death are the only guarantees in life. Everything in between is an ocean, a constant ebb and flow. Sometimes we find ourselves struggling against the current, fighting to keep our heads above the water, or we drift along peacefully until it's time to ride the waves as they rise and inevitably fall again. But the death of something that isn't tangible was uncharted territory for me, and I wasn't sure exactly how to process it. In one fleeting moment, I lost so much and felt like I was drowning. I lost a choice that I once had, a dream of seeing myself reflected in a little person, an ideal of how I thought my life would be, the opportunity to bear a child and have that beautiful shared experience with my mother. So grieving the loss of something that isn't tangible. My best friend, who I'm very grateful is here today, because she's been a rock for me through this whole thing, she suggested to me that maybe I should have an anniversary each year, an anniversary of my diagnosis, to either spend on your own or to spend with friends and family, to raise a glass to whatever the future holds, but also to allow yourself to grieve all over again if you need to. Because it's not something that's ever not going to be there. You can't kind of sweep it under the carpet. So to me it felt better to acknowledge it with love and to say, on this day, this is what happened, and then to move past it. It's very difficult, as I said, for friends and family and those around us to understand what we're going through. Christmases, birthday parties, christenings, baby showers, for the first few years was so difficult because I actually didn't really want to be around people at all. Over time I learned it's about finding a voice and finding your dialogue with people around you, people closest to you, to be honest and say, I'm struggling today, so excuse me if I'm a bit distant. You have to find your voice with them, because otherwise how are they going to know how we feel? They're not psychic, they can't understand, and how long it takes for us to accept ourselves, it also takes those people around us time to find acceptance and peace with it too. I realised over time that every time I didn't say something about how I felt, or every time I put on a brave face, it was like I was putting another layer of clothing on. And then I would face another Christmas or another situation, and I wanted to say, I just need to remove myself half an hour, but I didn't. It was another layer, until eventually those emotional layers really begin to weigh you down. But every time you find your voice and say, I'm struggling, so just give me a moment, the weight starts to lift, and it is possible to do it. You just have to be a little bit brave with it. There are different forms of counsel. I had some counselling, I had some CBT. For me, the greatest form of counsel came in nature. I went on a retreat, I learned how to meditate, and that's proved invaluable for me as much as writing my blog has. That's been a huge part of my healing process. The lady who runs the retreat, she's a a spiritual practitioner, but don't be put off by the word spiritual if you're not comfortable with it. She's basically a counsellor, but it feels like she deals with everything on a much deeper level. I saw her in 2010 when I was diagnosed, and I saw her again 4 years later when the grief really hit me. And she said something to me. She said, "You're making this bigger than it is." Now, if she'd said that in 2010, I would have been incredibly defensive and said, "But it is big, it's huge, it's all-consuming." But 4 years later, I understand what she meant. She wasn't saying it wasn't massive. She said to me, "I know it's huge, I know it's sad, and I know it's painful, but you're making it bigger than it is." And I was like, she's right. She's right. She said, people come to me with various diseases and illnesses. She said, I don't define a woman by her breast cancer. I don't define a person by their, by their addiction. And you wouldn't either, so why are you defining yourself by the fact that you can't biologically have a child? And it was a bit of a tough pill to swallow, but I couldn't disagree with her. I couldn't disagree that I was making it the sum of who I was. And it's massive, but it's not everything about who I am. So it's about getting to know myself again. The impact of the diagnosis for me, the inability to conceive was only a tiny part of it for me. Emotionally and psychologically, that was the biggest part of it. So who was I? How did I learn to get to know myself again? I never realised that I defined myself subconsciously on the fact that I'm a woman and I can have a child. I didn't realise I defined myself by my name, my family, my past experiences, my history. The me that I had to get to know now isn't defined by any of those things. It's that, everybody has it, it's that quiet voice on the inside, that essence of who you are. That's who I had to learn to love and accept and get to know again. And I think the concept of loving ourselves seems a bit self-indulgent to some people. But the Greeks had it right. Okay, they documented, how many? 8 different types of love that most of us will go through in our lifetime. We've got erotic, affectionate, familiar, playful, obsessive, enduring, self-love, and selfless. And it's self-love that I'm talking about today. I found a pretty concise definition online which says that self-love is not the unhealthy vanity and self-obsession that is focused on personal fame, gain, and fortune, as is the case with narcissism. It shares the Buddhist philosophy of self-compassion, which is deep understanding that only once you have the strength to love yourself and feel comfortable in your own skin will you be able to provide love to others. As Aristotle put it, all friendly feelings for others are an extension of a man's feelings for himself. So I had to learn how to love myself. And what does love mean to me? Love to me is that overwhelming feeling I get if my nephew puts his arms around me. It's the overwhelming feeling of calm that I have if I'm sitting under a tree. That to me is love, and that to me is peace. And I realised that loving myself is being kind to myself, not judging myself for what I can't do, and accepting myself. I think there's a really fine line between surrendering and letting go and giving up. It's not giving up. If I surrender and I've let go to this diagnosis and to what has happened to me, I'm not running away from anything, I'm running towards my future and the possibility that the future, which hasn't happened yet, can be bright and it can be beautiful. It's not what I thought it was going to be. The diagnosis will always be sad, but I don't carry that sadness around with me anymore. But there's a process to go through. I had to walk through the grief, I had to find my voice, I had to feel it, get to know it like an old friend. I don't know when I popped out the other side, but I did. It's 8 years on from my diagnosis, so it's not a quick fix. But any of us here who've been diagnosed and who are going through this, we're forever changed. We're forever changed, but my point to you is that it doesn't have to be a bad thing. I have a level of empathy and compassion for others that I don't think I had before. If I did, it wasn't as great. I have those things now. And if that's all I take away from this, I can think of worse things to have. And I'm going to use that compassion that I have for others, and I'm going to use it on myself and heal myself from the inside out every day. When I have those days where I'm never going to be able to watch One Born every minute. And no, I can't watch it. And you know what, that's fine. I just won't watch it. But I don't have the cloud around me anymore, and I promise you, I never believed I would stand here in front of you today. Whew! 8 years ago. Never would have thought it was possible. Ever. Ever. But peace is possible. Peace is inside you. It doesn't mean you're giving up. There are lots of different routes you can take. Amanda's story is so inspirational. It's not for me. I don't know why it's not. I just don't feel it is. But it doesn't mean I've given up. It just means I'm embracing a new future. And hopefully it will be bright and it will be beautiful. And I think it's amazing to stand here in front of you, and thank you for listening. If you want to read my blogs, they're on thelotusnetwork.com. You can find me on Twitter. I'll always be there for any of you if you need me. And yeah, you're all brave, beautiful warriors, and thank you for listening.